Okay, now that we've covered how to open up Excel, save a workbook, get familiar with the Excel interface, customizing the Excel ribbon quick access toolbar, it's time to start inputting data into the cells of the worksheet. Now for this example, we're going to be building a monthly expense report, and we're going to be building off this report for the next several videos. And we're going to be adding formulas, formatting, charts, and graphs to it to make it look all clean and organized and function properly as well. So for this video, all we're going to be doing is entering text values to create labels inside of Excel. Labels are actually very important, especially when we start importing tables and charts, because Excel needs to realize, oh, what do these numbers mean underneath these labels? So the first thing we're going to do is enter a title for the spreadsheet. So all we're going to have to do is click cell A1 and start typing monthly expenses and go ahead and click enter. The reason why we want to have a title is because it's not just for yourself, but it's also for other people, because it helps people understand your workings and you're like, oh, well, if I come here, obviously this is going to be monthly expenses. So underneath the title, we're going to go ahead and skip a row here. And so in cell A3, I'm just going to abbreviate expenses as EXP. And now we're going to start listing some of the expenses. So in a company, you might have cost of goods sold, wages, rents, supplies, utilities, and that should be good for now. So in the column headings, we're going to put some months because this is a monthly expense report. So we're going to put January, February, and March. So I think we're good here for the basic setup. But like I said before, having Excel labels such as column headings and row labels is very important because not only does it tell the users what the values actually mean, but it also plays a big part when you're inserting charts and graphs, because it wouldn't really make sense to have a bar chart with a bunch of bars with numbers on it, but you can't tell what it is because it doesn't have the labels. So right here, I think we're at a good stopping point. And in the next video, we're going to start adding numeric values into these cells. Alright, now that we got our column labels and row labels all set up, it's time to start putting numeric data into this expense report. So the first cell that we're going to be putting a numeric value in is the cost of goods sold for January, which is cell B4. So go ahead and click inside that cell. And let's just say that cost of goods sold was $1,000 for January. Now before I click enter, see if you catch the difference between entering a numeric value versus a text value like we did for the column labels and row labels. So if I click enter, you can see that the number is right aligned. What this means is that Excel automatically knows that we entered a numeric value. And the reason why Excel right aligns numeric values is because it helps with decimal places. So for example, if I change this to $1,000.58 and right below that for wages I put 527 cents, you could tell that the decimals line up and it's a nice clean look. Now if I select these cells by just clicking and then dragging over the cells to select them and change them to left align, you could tell that I'm getting like a little snake figure action where it's kind of hard to read the numbers because the decimals don't line up. So to undo that, I'm just going to click the undo button, which is also Control Z if you're on Windows or Command Z if you're on Mac. So Control Z. Now we're back to a nice cleaner look. Now I'm going to change these figures back to non-decimal figures. So $1,000 for cost of goods sold in January, and I'll put $500 for wages for January. Rent was $750, supplies $125, and utilities was $80. Okay, and I'm going to click Tab to go over to the cell to the right, and I'm just going to click on the up arrow key to go back up to February. Now let's say cost of goods sold in February was $850, wages stayed the same, $500, rent stayed the same, $750. Supplies, let's say $100 of supplies, and utilities went up by $40, so $120. So I'm going to click the enter key, and that just brought me down a cell. So I'm going to click the right arrow and go back up using the up arrow to March. And cost of goods sold, say 900. Wages, once again, the same. Rent, the same. Supplies went up even more, and utilities went down a little bit, so 95. Okay, well, I think we're at a good stopping point for this video since we got all of our numeric values entered in for all of our expenses and for each month. I just wanted to point out the difference between entering numeric values versus text values, because down the road when we actually start using these values inside of our formulas, it's important that they are formatted correctly. Because if we try to sum a text value with a numeric value, we're going to get an error, which we'll learn a little bit later in the course. But for now, I think we're all set, and in the next video we'll discuss how to format these values correctly to give us a little bit more information about what these values actually mean. Okay, so in this video we are going to be talking about how to format date values. Currently in our column headings we have January, February, March, and as of right now these are text values. To change these text values to date values, we need to insert a date in a date format so Excel knows that we are trying to have a date value instead of a text value. So we're going to click in cell B3 in the January column and type 1/1/20. You might have noticed that this cell went from left align to right align. So when we just had January in there, it was left, and when we put the date value in there, it goes back to right. That is because Excel treats date values as a number. Now that we've got a date value in the cell, we need to apply a little bit of formatting to make it look a little bit cleaner. So what we need to do is make sure to have the cell selected, go to the Home tab, up to the Numbers group, and click this drop down. This is where you apply value formatting. So as of right now, even though we have a date value in there, if we choose number, the date value number is 43831. Like I said before, Excel treats date values as numbers. But since we're dealing with dates, we have a short date, long date. That's not what we're really looking for. We're looking for that 3-letter month and then maybe a dash and the year. So if we go to more number formats down below and we click date in the category group, now over here to the right underneath type, these are all the predefined date formats that Excel gives us, and if we select one of these, up here in our sample box, it will show what our value in the cell would look like. And right now we are trying to find that 3-letter month, dash, and the year. So we got to find one that looks very similar to that, which is this March-12th one right here. If we click it, we can tell in our sample that it's January-20. Now, that could be January 20th or January of 2020. So if we want to change this to a 4-figure year, all we have to do is go down to the custom format. So up here in type, this is the format that is currently in place. But we can kind of use this to our advantage to see what it's doing and then customize it to our liking. Right now we see the 3 M's, which is the month, MMM-YY, which is the year. So we can kind of go off this and change it to how we want it, which is going to be MMM-YYYY. And you can tell in our sample box it is January-2020. And we can go ahead and click OK. And now you can see that in our cell we have the correct format that we want. Now we can go through that whole process and do that for each column heading, but that might take a little bit of time. So I'm going to show you a little Excel shortcut here. You want to click in the cell that has the formatting, and you want to drag your cursor to the bottom right corner of the cell until your cursor turns into a little thin black cross instead of a big thick white cross. And what you want to do is click and drag over the column headings. And as you can tell, in that little white box that pops up underneath it is showing what the value will look like. So if I extend it all the way to March and let go, now all of our column headings have the correct format. What we just used is called the fill handle. Now the fill handle is great for copying formatting, copying cells, and picking up patterns, which is what Excel just did. It realized that we started with a January, a date value, and extended it across to the next month, February, and then March. For example, if I put just a 1 in this cell real quick, and I click it and use the fill handle, it's just going to put 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and so on, because it's not picking up any patterns. But if I delete those and type in 1, 2, and 3, and select those cells, now if I use the fill handle and drag it down, Excel is picking up that there is a pattern. So it's picking up like, oh, I want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in order. So just keep that in mind, and we will use the fill handle a lot more later in the course. I just wanted to show you this quick tip because it could potentially save you a lot of time. I'm going to go ahead and delete these cells. Now that we got the dates formatted correctly, I think this is a good stopping point for this video. And we've put a good amount of work into this workbook. So if you haven't saved your workbook yet, I strongly suggest you do that. Remember, it's just File, Save As, since we're saving for the first time. Make sure you give your workbook a name. I'm going to call it Monthly Expenses. And I'm saving it to my desktop and click Save. Sorry, I already had one, but I'm going to go ahead and replace it. Click OK, and we're done. Okay, now that our monthly expense report is filled with labels, date values, and numeric values, we are ready to start adding some formulas to build more info into this report. Currently, we have the individual expenses filled in for every month, which is great. So we could see that supplies was $125 for the month of January, and then it was $100 for February. Now, this is great, but with reports like this, it'd be nice to have a total at the end of each month so we could see what the total amount of expenses was for January, February, and so on. Or we can have totals at the end of the column so we could see the total of cost of goods sold throughout all 3 months. Now, with Excel being such a powerful calculator, we can achieve these totals by building some basic formulas within our report. So let's go ahead and start building a formula to get the total amount of expenses for the month of January. So to start off, we need to click in cell B9 because this is where we want our total to be placed. Now, the number one rule when writing formulas or using Excel functions, you have to start them with the equal sign. And to start writing the formula, we can go ahead and start typing directly in the cell like we've been doing. So I can type an equal sign here, or I can come up to the formula bar and type the formula inside here. You can choose whichever one you prefer because either one would work just fine. Now to get the total, we need to start adding all the expenses together for the month of January. So for cost of goods sold, we had $1,000. Then we're going to click the plus sign to add these totals together. And for wages, we had $500 plus $750 for rent plus $125 and then plus $80 for utilities. Now if I click enter, it should give us a total of $2,455. And if we go ahead and select and highlight all of our expenses and come down to the status bar, we can see that the sum has a total of $2,455, so we can cross-check that to make sure our formula is correct, and in which this case it is. Now the way I just showed you to achieve this total is not very efficient for two reasons. One, we had to manually enter the amount for each expense. In this case, there's only 5 expenses, so it's not too bad, but let's say you had 50 expenses. That's going to take quite some time. And two, if I go up here and change cost of goods sold to $2,000 instead of $1,000, our total remains the same. So now our total is off. So I would have to come back here, edit the formula, and change this to $2,000. And now we have the correct amount. I'm going to go ahead and undo that by clicking Control Z to get us back to the original amounts. And now for the month of February, I'm going to show you a different way so we can remove those potential cons that we just talked about. So for this formula, instead of manually entering the amount of each expense like we did for the month of January, we're going to be using a technique called cell referencing. Now, as always, to start off the formula, we have to start it with the equal sign. And to add these cells together using cell referencing, all we have to do is click the cells that we want to add. So we're going to start off with cost of goods sold, which is cell C4. Click the plus sign, wages, and repeat the process for each expense. And now we can click enter, which gives us a total of $2,320. And if we select our expenses, go down to our status bar to cross-check our answer, Looks like our formula is outputting the correct value, which is good. Now the advantages of using cell referencing is one, that it eliminated quite a bit of time because we didn't have to enter the amount of each expense. And two, for example, let's say I go up to wages for the month of February. Instead of 500, we change it to 1500. That means our total should increase by $1,000. And if I click enter, you can see that our total went from 2,320 to 3,320. And if I click wages again and put it back to 500, it should go back to the original amount. Now this is still not the most efficient way to get a total sum of a column, but I wanted you to recognize the difference between manually inputting the numbers and get some practice using cell referencing. Now this is a good point to get some practice in, so maybe you can go ahead and fill in the formula for the month of March, or you can take it a step further and get the total of the cost of goods sold across all 3 months, wages, rent, and so on. Alright, as you can tell that I went ahead and added the formula for the month of March, and I did the formulas for each expense to give me the total of all 3 months. You can go ahead and check your answers, and if something's not matching up, go ahead and leave a question or a comment because I'll be more than happy to help. And that goes for any time through the entirety of this course, because if something's not making sense to you, if I explain something wrong, or if I even made a mistake, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So once again, please feel free to leave a comment or ask any questions anytime. Now that we got the basics on how to build a formula, we need to learn how Excel executes each part of the formula. And what I mean by that is order of operation. Now you may have heard of this term back in your elementary, middle school days, algebra days. I know a lot of people don't like math, but hate to break it to you, Excel is all about math. Now, Excel does a really good job at doing the math for us, but we need to set up our formulas correctly so Excel will execute the formula in the way we want it to get us the correct values that we're looking for. Now I'm going to give you a little acronym that I learned. It might be different than what you learned, but what it is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Now this is the order that tells Excel which operation to calculate first. P is for parentheses, E is for exponents, then it goes multiplication and division, and then addition and subtraction. Now this is the order of operations that Excel will calculate first. What I mean by operator is that it's a symbol to perform a mathematical operation. So you got the multiplication sign, division sign, plus sign, minus sign, and so on. So just as a quick example, you don't have to follow me. I just want to show you a simple example of a formula that has a single operator and then multiple operators. In our formula, if I type in equals 5 plus 3, that has one single operator, the plus sign, and 5 plus 3 equals 8. Now if I go into our formula and adjust it and put 5 plus 3 times 2, now this formula has multiple operators. Now you would think it would go 5 plus 3 is 8 times 2, which would be 16. But according to our acronym, it does multiplication and division first, then addition and subtraction. So in this case, it's going to go 3 times 2 first, which is 6, then go to addition, which is plus 5, and 6 plus 5 is 11. Now let's go ahead and delete this and do an actual example with our monthly expense report. So let's say we want to get the average of expenses for each month. So what we want to do is type in the equal sign, click in cell B4, plus 500, plus 750, 125, plus 80, and then divide this by 5 because we have 5 expenses and we should get our average. So when I click enter, the average for the month of January was 2,391. Now if I select these cells and highlight them and check down in our status bar, we can see here, whoa, our average is 491. So what went wrong? So let's click on our cell where our formula is and kind of dissect what is happening. Excel actually has a really neat built-in tool to show how Excel is calculating the formula. To check this, what we're going to do is go to the Formulas tab and then click Evaluate Formula. And here in this box, it shows that we are adding all the expenses together and then dividing by 5. And if we click evaluate, we could see what this formula is actually doing. So it has 1,000 for cost of goods sold, plus 500, which is 1,500, plus B6, which is 750. 1,500 plus 750 is 2,250. Then B7 is 125. 250 plus 2250 plus 125 is 2,375. Then lastly, B8, which is utilities, which is $80, and it should add 80 to the 2,375. It actually did 80 divided by 5, which is 16. So it's taking 2,375 plus 16, giving us 2,391, which we know is incorrect. So we're going to go ahead and click close. And then we're going to go back to our formula, and we're going to adjust it to make sure that Excel calculates this formula in the correct order that we want it to. So we know, based off our acronym, that parentheses get executed first. So in our formula, we need to add some parentheses to get the correct answer. So we're going to go up to the formula bar, click inside here, add an open parentheses at the beginning, and then add a closed parentheses after we add all the expenses together. So now our formula says we're going to add all these expenses together, then divide by 5. So if we click enter, now we see our average at 491, which based off in our status bar is the correct answer. And if we click our formula again and go back up to evaluate formula and click evaluate, now we can see that it's adding all the expenses together for a total of 2,455, which is our total here, and then divided by 5, which is 491. So you can see that if we don't tell Excel how to calculate the formula in the correct order, our answers are going to be way off. So it's really important to understand this order of operation. So this is actually a great time to practice and maybe do the same process for the month of February and March. And I also encourage people to play around with it. Add parentheses, add some multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, and see how Excel handles the order of operation. Alright, now that we got some experience building formulas using cell references, in this video I will be discussing the different types of cell references and explain how they change when you copy a formula to a different cell. I'm going to clear out some cells here to give us a little bit more room to work, and all I'm doing is selecting the cells I want to delete and pressing the delete key on my keyboard. Alright, now that we got some space, I'm going to be talking about two different types of cell references. The first one is a relative reference. And what I mean by relative is that when you have cell references within your formula and you copy this formula to a different cell, the cell references will change based on the relative position of rows and columns. For example, in our January column, we have a formula at the bottom to give us the total of all the expenses, B4 plus B5, B6, and so on. So instead of doing the whole process of going into cell, typing the equal sign, and choosing the cells that we want to sum together, what we could do is actually grab the cell that we only had to type in the formula once and copy this formula to the cells that we want totals in. So what we're going to do is copy the formula that's in cell B9 by pressing Control-C or Command-C if you're on Mac, and then click the cell that we want to paste our formula into and click Control-V or Command-V if you're on Mac. Now if you pay really close attention, right now in cell B9 we have cells B4 plus B5 plus B6, B7, B8. And when we paste it to cell C9, so we're changing a column, we're moving one column to the right. I'm going to press Control-V. Now if you look in our formula, we have cells C4, C5, C6, C7, and C8. So once again, cell B9, all of our cell references have B, and cell C9, all of our cell references have C, while keeping the row numbers the same. Same thing goes for March. I'm going to click in the March column and click Control-V to paste our formula. And right now we're still copying from cell B9, and we moved over 2 columns. So all of our cell references went from B4, B5 to B6 to D4, D5, D6 since we copied over the formula 2 columns. And since we didn't go down any rows, all of our row numbers stayed the same. So let's kind of do the same process for our totals in the very right column. So if we click in cell E4 that has our formula in it, and instead of copying, pasting the formula into each cell individually, all we have to do is click in the cell and move your cursor to the bottom right hand corner of the cell until your cursor turns into a thin black cross. And from one of the previous videos, we know this is called the fill handle. And we can use this fill handle to copy formulas down rows or across columns. And before we copy this formula down, I want you to think about how these cell references are going to change. Right now we have B4 plus C4 plus D4. And now that we're copying down rows, what do you think is going to happen to the row numbers? So let's find out. We're going to click and drag all the way down. And then now if we click in the cells, we went from B4 to C4 to D4. And if we go down a cell, it goes B5, C5, D5. And once again, B6, C6, D6. So now that we are copying the formulas down the rows, the row numbers are changing. And since we stayed in the same column, our columns are staying consistent. Okay, so that was relative referencing. And you could tell that when we copied formulas across columns or down rows, the cell references within the formulas would change relative to their position. Now the next type of reference that we're going to be discussing is called an absolute reference. And we're going to have to expand our report a little bit to give a proper example of how absolute references work. So let's go ahead and add a new column to our report, and we're going to call it percent of total. And our goal here is to get the percentage of each type of expense in regards to the total amount of expenses we paid for the past 3 months. So what we need to do is create a formula to get the percentage, and then we can copy that formula down our percent of total column. So to start off, we got to type in the equal sign, and then we're going to take cell E4, which is the total of cost of goods sold, divided by the total amount of expenses that we had to pay for all 3 months, which is cell E9. And we're going to click enter. So you can tell that the total expenses of cost of goods sold was 38% of the total amount of all expenses combined. Now if we click in this cell and we want to copy this formula down to the rest of the rows, we're going to grab our fill handle and we're going to drag it down to the rest of our expenses. We're going to let go, see what happens. Oh, alright, so obviously we have some errors in our formula, so let's go back to our formula and kind of see what is happening. So if we click in the formula bar, we could see that we have E4 divided by E9, which is great. Alright, then we're going to move down a cell, see what's happening here. Now we have E5, which is correct, divided by E10. So the cell reference actually moved down a row. So this cell is actually blank. And when you divide a number by 0, it's going to give you an error. So we want cell E9 to be constant. And that's what an absolute reference is that your cell references will remain constant regardless if you copy your formula down rows or across columns. So let's exit out of this and go back to our formula. And then we're going to go up to our formula bar. And to change cell E9 to an absolute reference, we have to put $signs before E and before 9. So when you see $E, $9, that means that is not going to change. Or you can use a shortcut by clicking F4 on your keyboard and you can cycle through the different references. So if there's no $signs, that means it's relative. If there's both $signs, that means the column and the row number are going to stay constant. So we can click enter. Now our first one still looks correct. Now if we drag down this formula through the rest of our expenses, we should be getting the correct percentages. And from the start, so it's E4 divided by E9. Then if we go down one row, we should see E5 divided by E9. And if we go down one more, it's E6 divided by E9. So the first part of our equation is relative because we want to take each expense and then divide it by the total. And then after the division sign, the total amount, cell E9, stays constant. And that's a absolute reference.